Hello, today we are going to take a look at the poem called A Dream Deferred by Langston Hughes. But before we get into the poem, I want to give you a really quick history lesson on a specific time period. So let's get started. In the 1900s, most African Americans lived in the southern states, and they worked in cotton fields and tobacco fields and sugar plantations or rice plantations. And I think you've learned about this part of history. But in the 19-teens and the 1920s, Southern Black Americans had their first opportunity to decide whether they should stay in the South, where it was very segregated and they weren't seen as citizens, or they could be extremely brave and move away from the only place they've ever known and look for opportunities to have a better life. At this time, a large number of African Americans decided to move to the northern or Midwestern states, and they moved for many different reasons. Some moved for job opportunities. The northern and Midwestern states could pay the African Americans less money at this time, which we know is wrong now, but they could go get jobs that was different than any work that they've ever done in the past. Some wanted educational opportunities to maybe go to better schools or to get an education altogether. And some wanted to just escape the racism and the violence that they were experiencing in the South. So several African American citizens fled the only land that they ever knew in the hopes of being recognized as a citizen. Now, because of this, lots of larger urban cities experienced a huge spike in population. And because of this, they call this time period the Great Migration, because people were migrating to the northern and Midwestern states. As the 20th century progressed, Black culture was redefined in these urban cities. African Americans were able to write, they were able to publish newspapers, they were able to publish poetry, novels, plays, they were able to have their own churches and their own businesses. And these were opportunities, again, that were never available to these people before. One of those cities that became very populated was Harlem, which is in New York. And Harlem became the center of a lot of activity and where many well-known artists gained their popularity. Musicians, for example, they were able to open blues and jazz clubs, and they became the gathering places for a lot of Black musicians where they could perform and again gain popularity. Writers, many African Americans began sharing their writing for the first time. They gained their voice so people could read their thoughts. Not only was it writing by African Americans, but they got to write about their life and what their life was like and is like, and their hardships that they had gone through, as well as the successes and celebrations that they had. Long story short, the African Americans totally flourished with this opportunity, and it created a cultural revolution that totally rocked the United States. This time period became known as the Harlem Renaissance. This was an extremely exciting time because the creativity of the African Americans had been suppressed for centuries while they were out in the fields working. And they finally had the opportunity to be the people that they had always dreamed to be. They were able to share their talents and also have others enjoy their talents. All right, now back to our poem. One of the people that gained a lot of popularity during the Harlem Renaissance was Mr. Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes actually accomplished a whole lot in his lifetime, but his poetry is what we're going to focus on today. He also was an activist. He published novels. He published plays. He did a lot of things, but we're going to focus on his poetry. Not only did Langston Hughes write poetry, but he actually got his work published. And when he got his work published, he gained a scholarship to be able to attend a university. Before we get to the poem, I have one more fun fact. Langston Hughes actually lived in Illinois for a short time when he was a child. Okay, enough of that. Let's go ahead and get to our poem. A Dream Deferred, written and read by Langston Hughes.
What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?
Now, in order to understand this poem, you need to understand what a simile is. Before we go into that, yesterday we learned what a metaphor is, and just to review, it is when you compare two things by saying that one thing is something else. So we said, she is a busy bee, he is a clown. Now, a simile is also when you compare two things, but this time you use the words like or as. We may say that a baby is as cute as a button. We use the word as. We didn't say the baby is a button. We said the baby is as cute as a button. If somebody is quiet, a simile would be he is as quiet as a mouse. Again, we compare the boy to a mouse and saying that he's quiet, but we use the word as. We could say, I slept like a log. A comparison using like or as, you're comparing your sleep to a log, how it doesn't move and it just stays in the same spot. You may be watching an athlete at track and say that he runs like a gazelle. You may describe somebody's hair as yellow as the sunshine. We are going to go through the poem again, only we're going to break it down, and we are going to discuss similes that we see in there and what the similes mean.
What happens to a dream deferred?
Before we go any further, we should talk about his meaning of a dream. He is not talking about the kind of dreams that you have when you sleep. He's talking about dreams as in like goals or visions that you have for your life. And also when he says a dream deferred, if we look up the definition of deferred, it is something that's put off. It's pushed until later. And that is the essential question of this poem. The author is asking you, what happens to a dream deferred? What happens to a goal that you have in life that you push off until later?
Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun?
So here we have our first simile. It is comparing the dream to a raisin. And if you think about what a raisin is, it is actually a dried up grape. And if you think of a healthy, juicy grape that you would buy at the grocery store, and it's full of life and health and goodness, if that grape is abandoned in the sun, it's going to shrivel up, it's going to dry up, and it's not going to be as full of life as it was before. So he's comparing, if you have a dream in life that you push off until later, does your dream lose its life?
Or fester like a sore and then run?
Okay, I hope you don't have a weak stomach on this part. So when he says, or fester like a sore, fester, if you were to Google that definition, it means to become infected. So think of falling down and scraping your knee. And if it festers, it gets infected, it forms pus, it is just really gross. I'm not going to go into much definition or much description because I'm pretty sure you could picture what I'm talking about. So imagine that sore, infected, running, stuff running out of it. Okay? Yuck. Here we have our second simile because it is comparing a dream deferred, a dream that is put off, to an infected, rotting sore. So that's not a pretty image, of course. And so if you think of an infection in your body, it can spread. And so in here, what he's trying to portray with this simile, or what he's trying to ask you, is if you put off that dream, does it kind of infect or impact other areas of your life or other dreams that you may have?
Does it stink like rotten meat?
So here we have another simile that is comparing your dream deferred to the stink of rotten meat. I don't know about you, but I actually really enjoy eating meat. I enjoy eating hamburgers and chicken and steak. And they're very appetizing to me and very appealing to me when they are fresh. However, if I were to leave them out on my counter when I came home from the grocery store and I didn't cook them or refrigerator freeze them, they would eventually rot, which is pretty much the worst smell in the world, rotten meat. And so he is asking you, as the reader, he's asking you, does a dream put off stink like rotten meat? Does it disgust you? Does it almost sicken you? So it used to be something that was very appetizing, very appealing, something that you really wanted, but then turned into something that once you put it off, once you think of it, the thought of it almost makes you sick. It is sickening that it didn't get done or it wasn't accomplished.
Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet.
When I think of a syrupy sweet, I think of a glazed donut. So a glazed donut is generally very desirable. It sounds really good. And it's the syrupy sweet on it is just kind of crystal clear and just kind of makes it look shiny and glazed. But if you leave that donut out too long, let's say you get donuts in the morning and you leave it out all day or even a couple days, eventually what will happen to that glaze is it will dry up and it will become like flaky, like white, flaky, syrupy, sweet glaze now. It's still good. It's still something that you would probably want to eat. It still is desirable to you. However, it's not as desirable as when it's fresh from the bakery. And so he is comparing that, or he's asking in that simile, is your deferred dream like crusted over syrupy sweet? Is it like the donut? It's still desirable to you, yet not like it was back when you initially wanted to accomplish that dream.
Maybe it just sags like a heavy load.
So in this simile, Langston Hughes isn't asking you about a dream deferred. Instead, he is making a statement or a suggestion that perhaps a dream deferred is like a heavy load. I'm sure your parents have asked you to take the trash out, and if it's a really heavy bag, it kind of weighs you down. Literally, it's weighing you down, but figuratively, does the disappointment of the dream that you never accomplished, does that weigh you down, figuratively speaking? Is that heavy on you? Does it bother you?
Or does it explode?
Whoa, explosions. Oh, okay, if you think of something exploding, I want you to visualize that. The thing blows apart, okay? And even though if it were, say, a building, even though that building no longer exists because it has exploded, there are still fragments of that building. There are still pieces of it. There is debris. And so that debris can never be put back together to form that same exact building. So in the same way, Langston Hughes is asking, does your dream kind of explode? Does it fall apart and it can't be put back together, meaning it will never be achieved? Or is it like an explosion inside of you where it's something that frustrates you or brings you anger or really, really bothers you? All right, I know I've thrown a lot at you today, but really, so far, all we've done is looked at the essential question that Langston Hughes is asking you as the reader, which is what happens to a dream deferred. And we've looked at the similes and explored the possible meanings that we could interpret for the dream, comparing to those objects or those events in the similes. We will go over this poem again tomorrow, only we're going to look in depth at more things to help us understand the poem, to help you understand that a poet uses lots of strategies to express emotion or to convey thought to its readers. I am going to have you today write a simile poem. In Google Classroom, I have a template for you. I tried to make it as painless as possible. You are going to be writing about yourself. I thought that would be easiest because you are the expert about yourself, and you need to use the template or the outline that I've supplied for you to use similes to describe different emotions or feelings or talents that you have. And so check that out. And tomorrow we'll come back to this poem, and maybe you'll go back to the initial poem that you were writing today, and maybe we'll continue to work on it and revise it to make it even better. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day. And on Edpuzzle, in order for you to watch the end of the video, I have to ask a question at the end. And some of you I could see are not doing that. So my final question is, how are you doing? How was your day? How was your break? How are you doing? You can write anything in this last section that you would like. All right, thanks. Email me if you have questions, or you can video chat me. Have a good day.